At the time, we had a friend in the family, a man by the name of Pat Gregory, a legend in DEA, talked to me about looking at DEA. And I still remember something Pat Gregory told me at the time is that being a DEA agent is the closest thing that exists to being James Bond. And he was absolutely right. Not because of anything I did or got to do, but it's simply the mission that DEA had, the international reach that DEA had, and the ability to truly make a difference in the world.
Okay, so for the audience, I'm going to do an interview right now with a retired DEA agent. Just a little bit of background before he introduces himself. So he began with DEA in 1984, served in San Jose, California, Brasilia, Brazil, Seattle, Brownsville, Texas, Islamabad, Pakistan, Kabul, Afghanistan, Dallas, Texas. He was at DEA, he was the Deputy Chief of International Operations, and he was the Special Agent in charge for the DEA Aviation Division, which we'll talk to a little bit about briefly, just because we haven't anybody to talk about. So, before we begin, can you introduce yourself for me, please?
Well, thanks for having me, Miles. Jeff Stamm, former DEA agent. Actually, I started out my law enforcement career as a deputy sheriff in Sacramento, California. Spent 31 years in DEA. And then it's not really considered law enforcement, but the last 6 years of my working life, I was actually the director of the Midwest HIDA, the High Intensity Drug Trafficking Area, which is kind of a contract position that falls under the White House Office of National Drug Control Policy. So total of 40 years in law enforcement. Guess one could say I've committed my adult life to the cause of drug law enforcement. And I don't consider any other profession out there as noble as law enforcement.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Okay, so can you tell me a little bit about you growing up, where you grew up, what your family life was like, and was there anything growing up that drew you to law enforcement?
Yeah, I suppose one could say I kind of got into the family business. Maybe was destined to be in law enforcement, so to speak. My dad was a cop. But, before I talk about some of those influences, I have to say that I was actually a child of privilege, and not in the economic sense. I've often said that I believe that I was extremely privileged to have grown up in a household where my two greatest heroes in life were mom and dad. Just exceptional people, raised their three boys to develop and demonstrate character in their lives, which I think is the most important thing in the world to give to their kids, and that's what they gave me. My mom grew up on a farm in South Dakota, never went to college, but I consider her to be probably one of the smartest people in the world, a voracious reader, gave me a sense of a hunger for history and things like that, and what goes on in the world, which maybe drew me to DEA a little bit to see the world, experience some of those things. She also instilled in me the need to not just float through life, but to make a difference, to leave the world a little bit better than you found it. With Dad, Dad was a deputy sheriff in the Sacramento County Sheriff's Department for 33 years. And I grew up as a child in the 60s when he was a deputy sheriff, becoming a detective later. And hearing his stories and just understanding the kind of work that he did. So I think in a lot of ways I was drawn to that as a kid. And in fact, it's also been interesting to see some of the developments over the years, that so much of what he fought against and worked toward, we ended up seeing some of the same things later in life. The Hells Angels that he fought, I ended up fighting in my DEA career. He spent some time also working against the Weather Underground, which was big in California, founded in 1969, a domestic terrorist group at the time, consisting mostly of rich white kids, but intent upon overthrowing the government of America and replacing it with communism, as well as undermining American law enforcement. And of course, in the 60s, cops back then were the pigs, right? They were defiled, degraded, devalued, attempts to defund them. And then later in life, we would find some of the same attempts. So, I think a lot of people today hear the term predators, referring to criminals in our society. And I think there's some truth to that. They do, in fact, prey upon innocent civilians. But my dad actually, I think, had a better term. He called them parasites in society. And I think that's true with drug traffickers today, drug traffickers in any period in society. So once again, I think I was sort of destined to follow Dad's footsteps with some of those examples. Became a deputy sheriff when I was 20 and a half, put myself through college after that as well. But as much as I respected my dad, he actually ended up retiring as the undersheriff of Sacramento County. When I was there in the department, he was one of 4 chief deputies, at the time, chief of detectives. So it was a little tough being the chief's kid, in the shadow of my dad in that department. So I attempted to strike out on my own and looked for a little different avenue in law enforcement. At the time, we had a friend in the family, a man by the name of Pat Gregory, a legend in DEA, talked to me about looking at DEA. And I still remember something Pat Gregory told me at the time, is that being a DEA agent is the closest thing that exists to being James Bond. And he was absolutely right. Not because of anything I did or got to do, but it's simply the mission that DEA had, the international reach that DEA had, and the ability to truly make a difference in the world. So came on with DEA in 1984. My first office was San Jose, California, which I have to tell you, at that time in 1984, cocaine was exploding. The place to be, the supposed center of the universe at that time, was South Florida, with cocaine pouring in from the Colombian cocaine cowboys. And to be assigned to San Jose, I was crushed. I wanted to go to Miami. I wanted to be one of the guys working with Miami Vice, right? But I would later come to the realization that taking the road less traveled is actually sometimes better, because I found out that being in San Jose was more in the center of the universe than Miami. Sure, Miami had bigger cocaine seizures, bigger cases against the Colombians, but in San Jose, we got to work Mexican black tar, Hell's Angels meth labs, Persian heroin, Chinese heroin, marijuana plantations, the whole gamut. And I actually had the opportunity to work with some of the finest criminal investigators, not just from San Jose PD and DEA at that time in that task force, but State Bureau of Narcotics Enforcement guys, LAPD, LASO, true professional, really experienced criminal investigators and law enforcement across the state. As I said earlier, there is no more noble profession, no more better way to make a difference in life and society than in law enforcement. And I actually think a smaller microcosm of that is drug law enforcement itself. Not just in DEA. I certainly have some very positive memories of DEA, but anybody working dope at any level, local, state, federal, international, it's the best opportunity to make a difference against the parasites in the world.
How, over the course of your career, I think you said 30 plus years in law enforcement, with all the places that you moved and all the places that you were at, how did working drug law enforcement, but law enforcement in general, how'd that affect your family?
Well, clearly it affected them greatly. I mean, I drugged my family all over the world, so many different domestic assignments. They clearly had to sacrifice themselves. My wife, my 3 kids. But the old adage, I think, is true, that adversity builds character. And I truly believe that some of the adversities that my family, especially my kids, have had to endure has made them more resilient, more realistic in how they see the world. They see the world as it is, not in how they wish it to be, like a lot of people from the left do. Probably the biggest adversity I subjected them to was in the summer of 2001. I took an assignment to be DEA's regional attaché in Islamabad, Pakistan. Now, at the time, obviously Pakistan's probably never been a very desired location for many people to move to and live. But for the family, the embassy had there one of the finest American schools in the world. So for the kids, they were going to get a wonderful education. The embassy grounds were exceptional as far as some of the amenities, the gym, the pool. It made life quite livable for the families. But for me, in drug law enforcement, it was the center of the universe again. Part of what used to be called the Golden Crescent, that opium and heroin production region in the world that spans Iran, Afghanistan, and Pakistan. So we had a huge footprint over there at that time, given the heroin production. In fact, when I went over there, I think at the time it was about 75% of the world's heroin produced at that time came out of the Golden Crescent, mainly Afghanistan and Pakistan. By the way, fast forward to today, it's about 90%. So it's gone in the wrong direction. But when the Twin Towers fell in September of that year, as you can imagine, it didn't just change the world; it completely refocused mine. Because as the boss of that office at that time, DEA had such a stable of informants in neighboring Afghanistan that we were uniquely poised to make a truly outsized contribution in those at least initial stages of the war on drugs. And a lot of people forget that the intelligence community at that time, following the Cold War, had grown so dependent upon high-tech platforms like overhead imagery or signals intercepts that the NSA did, that they were completely blind in Afghanistan. So the tools and the piece that DEA had initially to turn all of our counter-drug informants, tribal chieftains, warlords, opium cultivators, truck drivers, you name it, into the more acute and important war on terror at that time. In fact, the former ambassador to Pakistan, Wendy Chamberlain, at that time, had publicly stated many times that DEA's contribution was, quote, magnificent, unquote. And that wasn't anything I did. It was, once again, the machine that DEA had built over the years. In December of 2001, just 3 days after the U.S. Marine Corps, or the U.S. military in general, with a little help from the Northern Alliance, had captured the capital city of Kabul, the ambassador in Pakistan approached me and asked me if I'd like to accompany a small group of civilians into Kabul to reopen our U.S. embassy there, an embassy, by the way, that had been closed since 1979 when the Soviet Union invaded that country. How's that for the arc of history, right? Well, of course, I jumped at the chance and found myself that very night on a U.S. Air Force C-130 flying out of Rawalpindi Air Base there in Pakistan into downtown Kabul. When I got to the embassy there, a company of Marines had established a defensive perimeter, machine gun and mortar emplacements on the roof. And I set about to try to reestablish some of the contacts that DEA had with some of the Afghan contacts from the old days. I was shown my quarters there in the old two-story embassy, which was just basically a piece of the floor in that small old building. And since 1979 or sometime in the past, the windows, many of the windows had been shot out of the place, and birds had been coming in and out of that building for 20 years plus, making their mess all over the floor, and which was where I was going to be sleeping. And I've joked many times that it was actually that trip that I discovered one of the mysteries in life, which is what that white stuff in bird poop is. You know what that is?
No.
That's bird poop too.
Okay.
Now, I tell that story just to make the point that sometimes things are just exactly as they seem. Sometimes things really are just about black and white, right and wrong, good and evil. Drug trafficking and abuse is one of those things.
Yeah.
And by the way, so is terrorism, and so is the combination of the two.
Yeah, and I think it's really important. I don't think most people know this, and maybe you can talk about a little bit more about this, but drugs are just pervasive in everything. No matter if it's just, they're in every sort of criminal organization, criminal activity you can possibly imagine. So certainly for me, it's not a surprise, but I think it may be a surprise that all of a sudden DEA, who is responsible for drug trafficking enforcement around in the United States, but definitely in the world as well, all of a sudden you're the lead agency effectively for terrorism because you have these informants that nobody else has.
Well, just like drugs is so intertwined with so many elements of crime in our society, in fact, I think it's been estimated, going back as far as like James Q. Wilson in the 60s, that as much as 2/3 of all crime in our society is directly attributable to drug use and or drug trafficking. 2/3. Right. So the greatest crime control measure you can employ anywhere, local, state, federal, internationally, is drug control. And we keep forgetting that lesson, by the way, in our country. But since 9/11, when terrorism really exploded on the scene, it also became apparent that drug trafficking and terrorism are completely intertwined. In fact, just to go back to Afghanistan, I was already out of Afghanistan in 2005, but the military by then had greatly built up a huge presence throughout the country with some embedded DEA guys as well. And we had captured a guy by the name of Haji Bashir Noorzai, a member of the Haqqani Network, which is a terrorist offshoot of the Taliban, for not just drug trafficking and money laundering, but for narco-terrorism. Specifically, that statute that we charged 21 U.S.C. 960. And much of his funding from heroin distribution had been pushed back into the Haqqani network used against American service personnel. Subsequently, he was extradited to the U.S., where he was convicted, sentenced to life in prison. But talk about forgetting lessons in history, or life actually. In December of 2022, the Biden administration traded him in a prisoner exchange for a civilian contractor that had been kidnapped in 2020 in Afghanistan, specifically designed to be able to trade him for Haji Bashir Noorzai. And by the way, Noorzai at that time in the early 2000s was not just Afghanistan's largest heroin trafficker, but was the world's largest heroin trafficker. And we traded him to get a civilian contractor back from capture in Afghanistan. Now, I'm happy for that man. Mark Frericks is his name. I'm happy that he's back with his family here in the U.S. But this country used to have a policy forever, going all the way back to the days of Thomas Jefferson and dealing with the Barbary pirates, that we would not negotiate with terrorists. Well, suddenly, we're not just negotiating with terrorists, we're negotiating for terrorists. It's a disappointing lesson that we've learned here recently, and what's truly necessary, and sometimes our government sometimes does not act in our best interests.
Yeah. Jeff, I want to ask...
And by the way,
yeah.
Just to continue that thread,
Mm-hmm.
The whole narco-terrorism piece is most acute right now with Mexico. There's absolutely no doubt today that Mexico is a narco state in every sense of the word. Mainly because we know terrorism is not just a particular ideology or a specific entity. It's a tactic. And every single one of the Mexican cartels today are engaging in the tactics of terrorism.
So with that being said, how does it put us in danger with our southern border the way it is?
Oh, hugely. I think the damage is so deeply already accomplished. I think putting Humpty Dumpty back together again is going to take decades, if ever. It's fundamentally changed this country. For decades, our own government has lectured the Pakistanis. I used to be part of those discussions, by the way, that they must not allow themselves to be used as safe haven for terrorists fleeing Afghanistan, taking up refuge in their country. Well, right now, when the Mexican government occasionally still brings the heat against the bad guys in Mexico, where do you think their safe haven is? That's right, they seemingly come across our border at will, taking up refuge inside our country. We have been fundamentally unserious about protecting ourselves at our southern border, not just from drug smugglers and human traffickers, but from narco-terrorists. And that will come back to bite us here one day soon. Maybe not in the form of a large terrorist act, but certainly the continual degrading and undermining of our society every day, not just with drugs, but human trafficking, other types of organized crime. I, I actually can think of no greater modern example of Cicero's warning to his fellow Romans about allowing an enemy within the gates. And we continue to do it.
Yeah. Jeff, I want to ask you is something we discussed today. So from Pakistan to Afghanistan to your time in Brazil, can you tell me, you worked in Brazil, and I've asked this of other DEA agents who are working in other countries. Can you tell me the attitude typically of foreign governments towards drugs, of how they see the problem of drugs? Do they see it as their problem? Do they see it as our problem? And what's their overall take on it?
Well, not just from my time in Brazil or Pakistan, but also as deputy chief of our international operations in DEA, I can tell you that there's not one thing that better unites law enforcement throughout the world than the drug issue. It degrades and debilitates every society. I even had relations with the Iranian police for a short time relative to the drug issue because heroin devastates their society as well. There's simply no better issue for law enforcement throughout the world to cooperate on than the drug issue. Certainly, some countries have better relations than others with American law enforcement, but the DEA has been extremely successful internationally over the years because the vast majority of foreign countries know that we're not there to engage in espionage or intelligence collection. We're there to do law enforcement. And much of that law enforcement positively affects their country just as much as ours. You know, it's interesting about Brazil when I was there, and that was throughout the early 90s. Cocaine was pouring out of all three Andean countries at that time, Peru, Bolivia, Colombia, in all directions. But most of the cocaine at that time, the vast majority, was all destined for America. And we had some great cooperation with our Brazilian counterparts. But for the most part, they just assumed that was America's problem, that it would never affect them. They've obviously come to the realization that was not true back then. That people don't realize that the second largest drug consumer market in the entire Western Hemisphere right now, second only to the U.S., is Brazil. It's totally out of control there. Their organized crime problem, the Comando Vermelho, the Red Brigade, controls all cocaine trafficking in that country. The Red Brigade, even when I was there, was cooperating with Colombian narco traffickers, moving multi-ton loads of cocaine through the Amazon to the East Coast port cities of Belém, Recife, Fortaleza, São Paulo, to push cocaine loads into West Africa to move them into Western Europe, taking advantage of those linguistic and commercial ties that some of those former colonial African countries had. In fact, you can fast forward to today, one of the main favorite countries over the years by first the Colombians and now the Mexicans has become Guinea-Bissau, on the very western tip of Africa, mainly due to the obscene levels of corruption by that military dictatorship in the country. So obscene that their leaders figured out that they could make a lot more money for themselves by taking payment, not just in US dollars, but occasionally in cocaine to be able to sell to their own citizens. It's a little known fact today that the highest per capita crack cocaine addiction rate in the world today is Guinea-Bissau. a country just a generation ago had never heard of cocaine. That's truly evil right there, in my opinion.
So I'm curious then, what do you think the cause is from going to this is America's problem to them having a serious cocaine problem? Is it disposable income, or is it maybe just a lack of opportunity where people start using drugs? What's your opinion on that?
I think there are two, and history bears this out, there are two principal causes of every drug crisis. And by the way, that's whether drugs are legal or illegal, as the prescription drug phenomenon here in this country with opioids proved. It's about availability and acceptability. If you've got so much drug availability coming into your country that's unchecked, and by the way, it's law enforcement's job to check that. And if you have a sort of a culture in your society that thinks that drug acceptability is not much of a problem, you're going to have a drug crisis. And I think that's proved true throughout the world. You know, our experience with crack cocaine in the late 80s and early 90s bears that out as well. And we actually achieved a great win over crack cocaine, not completely, but largely by attacking both availability and acceptability. We attacked the cocaine production and distribution continuum at every level, blowing up cocaine labs in South America, attacking the transit zone in the Caribbean and Central America, attacking precursor chemicals, money laundering, building cases against the major cartel heads and extraditing them to the U.S., and lastly, by targeting the violent predators, the street-level drug sales across America. And by the way, that last one, greatly aided by the crack laws that U.S. Congress passed in the early 90s. Crack laws, by the way, that were mostly brought about through the leadership of the Congressional Black Caucus in Congress at that time, mainly responding to the demands of black leaders throughout the country that demanding that something had to be done to make the predators stop preying upon their communities. But also acceptability. We had at every level, government, business, parents, churches, even media, all unified in their opposition to drug use and drug trafficking at that time. And by the way, that last one, according to Mark Kleiman from New York University years ago, greatly aided by what he called a proliferation of $5 crack whores throughout society, willing to do anything for another hit from the crack pipe.
So why do you think we haven't learned as a society? What's going on where, for example, in Oregon, they, in essence, decriminalize hard drugs. They've realized it's a problem. They're trying to go back on that now. But you and I talked about this before. I can think of no better way, if I'm an adversarial country like China or Russia, just the easiest way to destroy our country internally is just keep feeding us drugs. Where did do you think it changed where it was sort of, hey, we had kind of a societal approach to go, drugs aren't good for us. And now it's switched to where it's like you have drug legalization talk, not just for marijuana, but for hard drugs as well. Where do you think that we've gone wrong?
I think society has lost the ability to be mean to people. And that's really what it boils down to. The Mesquite, Texas Police Department has an unofficial motto that basically says, if you can't behave yourself, you can't live here. I think that's wonderful. It says it all. But it's become politically incorrect to think that way. I think in a lot of ways, it's the 1960s mentality where you're supposed to be able to do whatever you want. Do it if it feels good. Whatever's your bag. I think the left has really won a lot of those culture wars today, where we don't simply have the guts anymore in this country to punish wrongdoers. But as we know, that's the only answer. That's the only outcome that we're going to get, which is a degrading of society, unless we punish those who prey upon our fellow citizens. Several years ago, I think it's behind me on my shelf here somewhere, a guy by the name of Robert Sutton, a business author, wrote a book called The No Asshole Rule, wherein he defined an asshole as not simply somebody we dislike or disagree with, but somebody who exploits or oppresses other human beings. That's a pretty good description for a drug dealer right there.
Yeah.
Exploits or oppresses other human beings. We have to push back against the parasites and the predators in our society. We've become cowardly in needing to do that.
And I want to talk a little bit about, we've discussed this as well. You have a lot of, we used to have a little bit more discussion about this, which is, even though you and I are the enforcement arm of this, in terms of drug law enforcement and taking care of this issue, it's not just enforcement. And I thought it was something interesting that you brought up earlier, which is, the biggest pushback you get, or people in general get from enforcement, are the people that are running, say, rehab clinics, where they just don't see a need whatsoever. They just want to do one prong. And I think you and I are in agreement, this can't just be an enforcement. We need those guys as well. We need multiple prong approaches, but you just can't do away with enforcement.
It's absolutely true that saying that we're not going to arrest our way out of the drug problem. That's absolutely true. In fact, law enforcement's been saying that same thing for decades. But one thing that law enforcement knows, and I think most common sense Americans do too, is that we're also never going to control drug trafficking and abuse without the law enforcement component. Traditionally, our drug control model has been equal thirds of treatment, prevention, and enforcement, all working in synergy, if you will. But to your point there, I've met with a lot of different groups on the drug control issue over the years, especially during my period as the HIDTA director in Kansas City. And the most closed-minded, arrogant group of all, as you just alluded to, are a lot of the drug treatment folks that really think they're in competition for souls, competition with law enforcement. And it's also been kind of astonishing to me over the years that so many of our leaders in law enforcement, not the majority, but many of them, continue to try to show their compassion by bending over backwards and working in conjunction with the treatment and prevention folks when there's no reciprocity there in many cases. I've often said, you will never ever go to a Health and Human Services conference with drug treatment and prevention folks where they acknowledge the fact that they should give up part of their budgets to law enforcement because they're the most important third in that equation.
Yeah. Can you talk a little bit? I want your own opinion, since you spent a lot of time overseas. What was the difference that you saw doing law enforcement domestically versus internationally, and did you have more of a satisfaction one way or another, whether you're working domestically or internationally?
You know what? I think they're both different. They're both entirely necessary, and they're both exceptionally fulfilling in their own ways. I've never said that DEA is the be-all, end-all for drug law enforcement. I think some of the best cases I've ever seen have been from Fargo Police Department, Eureka, California. It's street-level narcotics guys doing the best job they can with innovation, imagination, improvisation to push every case that they do as far upstream as possible to create their own courtroom quality evidence. There's no other job in law enforcement, unlike narcotics work, where we don't simply have the ability to react to crime or even as detectives to detect it. We've got to go out and actually create and instigate our own overt acts. That's different than entrapment, don't get me wrong, but you've got to go out and continue to push every investigation with imagination and improvisation, because drug traffickers are ever evolving. So too must the good guys. So that being said, the international piece, there's also a lot of satisfaction to be gained by taking a multi-ton load off in, say, the port of Rio de Janeiro before it has a chance to hit the high seas on its way to Miami, Florida. It's also quite satisfying to work with Pakistani cops or Brazilian police, you name it, throughout the world, helping them improve their institutions and capabilities, which is what DEA has done for many years throughout the world. I think we're in 87 countries throughout the world right now, doing some incredible work, and I don't think there's a greater threat to the U.S. right now than the drugs issue, which is exacerbated by the open borders and all that relating to terrorism as well. It's not potential flashpoints in Europe or what NATO ought to do or other parts of the world. It's our own open borders right now that's continuing to undermine our society with drugs. And it has to be fought at every level, from the street level crack sales that the Crips and Bloods engaged in, to the meth labs that the Hells Angels are still involved in, to a much lesser extent, to the major Mexican cartels or narco terrorists, as I call them. It's got to be fought at every level. We took our eye off the ball in Colombia. The cocaine production level in Colombia today is roughly 2 million kilograms right now, according to the UN. That's twice of what it was during the heyday of the Cali and Medellin cartels. We simply took our eye off the ball in many parts of the world. It has to be fought all the time at every level. And by the way, this is not a war on drugs we're ever going to win. It's a constant, obligatory struggle against complex social, criminal, and pharmacological forces.
Yeah. I want to get back to the question that kind of started us off on this, which is the effects of the job on your family. If I was to go back and chat with your kids, and for that matter, chat with your wife, I know how many hours DEA guys put in. I'm just talking about law enforcement in general, but in your case, DEA. Part of it is it's just a fun job, but you also feel like you're making a difference. So you're putting in very long hours. If I was to go back and chat with your kids or your wife, what do you think they would say in terms of the job and how it affected your family?
Well, I think they would tell you that it's been an adventure too. Maybe not always in a good way, but as I said earlier, I think my kids are realists and they're resilient today because of some of the adversarial positions I've put them in over the years. But none of my 3 kids elected to go into law enforcement. Not that disappoints me greatly. They're all incredibly successful in life. But all 3 of my kids did go into the military to serve their country. So I think in a little different way, they too recognize that civilization must be defended, that this is our society, one worth fighting for.
Yeah.
And they've done so. So I'm incredibly proud of my family. Much of my kids' success is due to my wife, not me. She's actually the smarter of the two in this partnership. But speaking of families, when I was in Pakistan, when 9/11 happened, they evacuated the families, and they had to come back to the U.S. and move in with my in-laws, re-register for school. It was hugely problematic on a personal level. Although I still got to have fun over there in that part of the world. But it's a little known fact that the State Department regulations require if an evacuation lasts longer than 90 days, it by statute becomes permanent. It's a no dependent post. So at that time, I think the State Department was afraid to not have that particular set of optics to the world. So they brought the families back. And in March of 2002, there was a very small building off the embassy grounds there in Islamabad, which was the Protestant International Church, where folks from all countries, all Christians from everywhere in the world, mostly diplomats, would go to church on Sunday. In March of 2002, a Pakistani suicide bomber walked into the church one Sunday morning and blew himself up and killed 5 Americans and wounded scores of other folks in that church at that time. 2 of those dead were the wife and daughter of a man named Milton Green, who was the embassy IT technician there at the time. A great guy. He actually had his daughter die in his arms after a piece of shrapnel severed her carotid artery. His wife died instantly. Both he and his son were severely wounded and ended up being evacuated for several months. In late 2002, I personally witnessed what I thought was one of the most courageous things I'd ever seen. Milton Green came back to Islamabad, Pakistan to finish the job and to allow us to honor him and give him a kind of a memorial service to his family. I cried like a baby that day, given the sacrifice that he made. And it was incredible. I've since lost touch, I'm sorry to say, with Milton Green, but it was one of the greatest demonstrations of profiles and courage that I've ever seen. So any sacrifice that I think I've made or my family has made pales in comparison to guys like him.
So I haven't had many people that I can ask this of, but because you were Deputy Chief of International Operations, you were high enough up that I can ask this question. And we talked about this a little bit. It's when administrations change and you have a new administrator or deputy of operations come in, but who comes up with the plans of what DEA is going to focus on? You know, we had the Kingpin strategy, then we had this 360 strategy. We're currently run a one pill can kill strategy. Is it a committee? Who comes up with those ideas?
You know, in my experience, I think it's largely been driven by some kind of replacement. Either at the top, we have a new DEA administrator come in, or maybe a new chief of operations that looks for a different way to do things. Sometimes it's politically driven. Usually a new DEA administrator comes in with a new political administration. We've oscillated back and forth so much over the years between more compassion and more enforcement. So many of those changes really are a function of personalities at the top. But one thing remains crystal clear is that DEA is an enforcement agency. A lot of people can engage in the treatment and prevention, the so-called compassion piece of this thing, but there's only one agency that is poised to make a huge difference internationally, but also with all of our partners domestically. You know, I'm a bit of a student of history when it comes to the whole war on drugs issue, and it's actually been frustrating and disappointing over the years to see, after creating DEA in 1973 as a single mission drug law enforcement agency created by Nixon in 1973, that over the years we continue to allow wave after wave of proliferating agencies and proliferating governments, government programs out there that undermine that single mission focus of a DEA. You know, when I was in Brazil in the early '90s, when the Cold War ended, there was no major national security game in town anymore. So we saw much of the national security apparatus lift and shift and suddenly get involved in the war on drugs. Now, much of that assistance was welcome, DOD assets in the Caribbean, for instance, but so many agencies, like the CIA, didn't just want to help in the drug war. They wanted to just go do their own thing. So in many cases, whether it's DEA attempting FBI attempting to take DEA over, or CIA doing their own thing overseas, in many instances, it's been counterproductive. It's also been quite confusing to a lot of our host nation counterpart law enforcement agencies overseas. So I'm not saying DEA does it all right, but there's one agency traditionally that local, state law enforcement throughout the U.S. as well as foreign countries know is only engaged in one thing, and that's to take it to the bad guys producing and selling drugs worldwide.
Yeah, I never really understood why we have one mission, DEA has one mission, and why FBI is involved, and now Homeland Security is involved, and ATF is involved. You have all these different federal agencies, and they have kind of their own things that they should be working on. And just, and I get it. Like for ATF, I totally understand why they want to do a drug case, because you have a nexus to other illegal stuff, whether it's explosives or firearms and felons carrying firearms and dealing drugs. But I just, sometimes it got a little frustrating having these other agencies get involved in drugs, and it's like, this is all we're supposed to do.
Well, it becomes eye-opening going to Washington, D.C., working in DEA headquarters to see how the sausage is made in Washington, D.C. And it's not pretty in a lot of ways. In fact, a lot of our elected elites that we send to Congress don't have a clue of not just the history, but what's right and wrong, and what has to be done to protect our fellow citizens. Sometimes the federal government works against the national security of our own people. In fact, we're seeing that today with our open borders. Yeah. We've seen it state by state in about half of our country right now with marijuana legalization. The science is in, and the science is unequivocal that marijuana is debilitating and degrading at every level. But Congress doesn't want to hear that. A lot of politicians don't want to hear that. They only want to hear about the tremendous money that can be brought in by legalizing weed, which all goes up in smoke if you really truly analyze the social costs versus any potential benefits. So there's some frustrations in a democratic society, but dealing with all that, I've often said the drug control apparatus we have in our country today, it's a lot like Winston Churchill's famous observation about democracy. It's absolutely the worst system ever devised by mankind, except for all the others.
Yeah. So another question I wanted to ask you that you're uniquely qualified to answer is, can you talk about the DEA Aviation Division, essentially? I don't think people realize what DEA has in that division. Can you talk about the assets and what the job is of the Aviation Division?
I was actually honored as my last position in DEA to be the special agent in charge of our global aviation division. I've been given that job mainly because we had a pretty significant aviation piece in Afghanistan at that time, and trying to interface with DOD and the intelligence community, and trying to figure out that ISR, that intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance piece over there, as well as troop transport, that kind of thing. But most of the aviation piece in DEA is targeted for domestic surveillance. It's kind of a backbone of what the Aviation Support Division does. But there's also a huge piece with conducting extraditions from overseas, providing equipment and sensitive needs to our overseas offices. And by the way, we've got some of the best pilots in the world flying for DEA. Guys that are willing to fly into areas that most pilots wouldn't. Willing to fly bad guys or guns or dope anywhere in the world. And it's important to note that all of our DEA pilots are agents first.
And that's what I was going to ask you is, what does it take to become a DEA pilot?
Well, you have to qualify to be a DEA agent first. And the main reason for that is because if you're on the ground in an undercover deal, if you're getting ready to kick a door, you want to know that the guy in the air is going to do the right thing for the mission and for his fellow teammates on the ground. And for that, I think there's no better requirement than they got to be an agent first. So there's no specific requirement to have any kind of aviation qualification before coming into DEA. Obviously, DEA likes to look for former military pilots or, even those that have licenses before coming in with DEA. But you have to be, it's kind of like the old adage that no matter what job you have in the Marine Corps, whether you're a pilot or a general or even a dentist, you're first and foremost a Marine rifleman. The same goes true with DEA. You're first and always an agent. One of the things that I got to be involved in as one of the first things I did in the Aviation Division, and we didn't personally fly this mission, but we helped coordinate it, was the extradition of a guy by the name of Victor Boot in 2011, also known as the Merchant of Death. Now, he was given that nickname because he was a former Russian intelligence officer turned one of the most prolific arms dealers in the world. At the height of his activity, he was flying as many as 6 Russian aircraft a day into Afghanistan, supplying the Taliban with weapons and equipment. Where he really ran afoul of U.S. law, however, was when he agreed to sell shoulder-fired surface-to-air missiles to the FARC in Colombia, specifically to kill Americans engaged in counter-narcotics. So SOD, our Special Operations Division in DEA, instituted a pretty sophisticated sting operation that led to his capture in Bangkok, Thailand in 2011. So we engaged in his extradition. But unfortunately, just like Haji Bashir Nourzai from Afghanistan, in December of 2022, our current Biden administration effected a prisoner swap to get back WNBA celebrity Brittney Griner in what was described as probably the most lopsided prisoner exchange in the history of our republic. Now, Ms. Griner was not a political prisoner, as our administration liked to make her out to be. She was a drug smuggler. She got caught smuggling THC concentrates into the Moscow airport. And we traded her for the Merchant of Death.
Okay. All right, Jeff, can you tell me, this is one of the questions that I'd like to ask toward the end, can you tell me how your views on society and people have changed since beginning your career with law enforcement?
Well, let me say that I don't think it cannot change. Anybody that gets into law enforcement, even a street-level patrolman, it's going to change your views on your fellow man. And not just because law enforcement deals with the dregs of society, the parasites, if you will, but because we deal with all walks of society. I've often said that the greatest armchair psychologists in our society are the cops. It's not, the academics in their cloistered towers. It's the average street cop who understands how the world works. So I don't think you can get in DEA and not have your view of your fellow man change. And it's absolutely true that line between good and evil cuts through every human heart. There's often sometimes some disappointments in the people that you deal with in government, in life, even sometimes in your fellow law enforcement community. But you know what? We develop a sense to see the world as it really is, to understand how to make the best difference for your fellow citizens. And it cannot just come from compassionate approaches. Sometimes you have to hold people accountable. And there's only really one entity out there that can get that done, and that's in law enforcement. One of the greatest examples of leadership I ever saw and got to participate in was when I was an ASAC, an Assistant Special Agent in Charge in Dallas, in 2011, when Jaime Zapata and his partner Victor Avila from Immigration and Customs Enforcement were operating in Mexico. They actually were stopped in a makeshift roadblock by the Zetas in Mexico and tried to identify themselves by rolling the window down just enough to badge these bad guys. And of course, they were met with AK-47 barrels into the car, and Jaime Zapata was killed instantly, and his partner Victor Avila severely wounded. He would actually survive, and I believe he's actually running for Congress as we speak in South Texas. But when that happened, the Obama administration put out a press statement saying that we would work with the Mexican authorities to bring the assailants to justice. A completely sheepish and weak response. But what came next was even weaker. It was nothing. At that time, the Zetas had probably their principal command and control center in the U.S. in Dallas, Texas. So our special agent in charge at that time of DEA Dallas, Jimmy Capra, decided, you know what? We cannot allow this to happen. The good guys cannot let this stand. So we're going to take it to the Zetas at every level. And he put together a coalition of local, state, law enforcement agencies, city government inspectors, an entire broad array to go out and kick the Zetas in the ass as best we could. DEA headquarters actually got wind of that and said, wait a second, stop. Let's postpone this for a week because this is such a good idea. We're going to make this happen on a national level. And our SOD, Special Operations Division, coordinated that in what became known as Operation Bombardier. Our fellow ICE agents who had been actually embarrassed at the response from their own agency, their own government, was more than happy to jump in. And we took it to the Zetas across the country at every level, not just building drug cases, but doing knock and talks, arresting family members for any ancillary misdemeanor arrest warrants we could, deporting family members, even the most ancillary ones for even having a connection to them. We kicked their ass all the way across the country. At the end of the day, I think there were a total of 450 arrests, 300 kilos of cocaine seized, a couple hundred pounds of methamphetamine, 8 tons of marijuana, and $10 million in cash, gold bars, and other drug proceeds. We kicked them in the ass so hard that the Zetas, although they're still around, never really recovered. So that's truly leadership. And in fact, we did the same thing in 1985 when DEA agent Kiki Camarena was kidnapped, tortured, and killed by the Guadalajara cartel back then. We took it to the Mexican traffickers relentlessly for years, including Dr. McChain, who was the doctor who was brought in to keep Kiki alive for as long as he could so they could continue to beat on him and extract information. The Mexican traffickers had learned for the next 26 years that you don't lay a hand on American law enforcement because the good guys are obliged to respond to such profane violations of justice as that. So has my view of mankind changed? Absolutely. But once again, for the best, because there's no other way to see life than the way it really is.
Do you have any advice to people who are looking at this channel and want to go in law enforcement?
Yes, do it. As I said at the outset, there's more noble profession than law enforcement. If you truly want to make a difference in the world, in life, and that's even in your small local police department, becoming a state trooper, becoming a federal agent, becoming an intelligence analyst, or even a prosecutor, there is no more rewarding experience, no more ability to make a positive impact on the world than to go into law enforcement. It's not going to be easy. Sometimes so many elements of our own society, even in government, will rail against you for truly unjust remarks about your motives and motivations. But in the big scheme, you can make a difference in life.
Jeff, thank you for the interview.
Thank you.